Manchester United didn't just replace Casemiro this summer. They tried to replace him twice, with two players who don't actually agree on which parts of his job they're taking. Let that sink in for a second. 2 transfer fees, 2 positions of need on paper, 1 actual vacancy on the pitch. And by the time this window closes, Manchester United may have discovered that spending £85 million doesn't automatically buy clarity. Sometimes it just buys a more expensive version of the same argument. Because right now, inside Old Trafford, there is a debate happening that no press conference has addressed directly. Who is actually the number 6 here? Not on the depth chart, not in the matchday squad list, in the job description. Stick with this one. It's not really about 2 good signings. It's about whether Michael Carrick has solved a problem, or just made it more expensive to look at. Rewind to January.
Manchester United and Casemiro mutually agree to scrap a clause that would have automatically triggered a 5th year on his contract. The club confirms it publicly. Casemiro will leave Old Trafford when his deal expires at the end of the season, closing a 4-year chapter that started at Real Madrid and ends, by mutual consent, without a replacement yet lined up. There's no messy exit here, no falling out narrative to hide behind. It's a clean, mutual, adult decision, which in some ways makes it harder to plan around. There's no forced urgency, no transfer committee panicking to fill a hole overnight. United had 6 months of advance notice that the most experienced defensive midfielder in world football over the last decade was walking out the door. 6 months to identify exactly one profile of player and go get him. They didn't do that. They went and got 2. Manuel Ugarte, the player signed specifically to eventually succeed him, is sidelined long-term. His future at the club is unresolved. Which means the succession plan United actually had in place, the one they paid for 2 years ago, isn't available to solve the problem it was bought to solve. That's not a footnote. That's the entire reason this summer's business looks the way it does. Which brings us to July. 2 deals, days apart. Manchester United complete a near £50 million move for Andrey Santos, a 22-year-old Brazilian from Chelsea. Then they trigger a £35 million release clause to sign Youri Tielemans, a 29-year-old Belgian international from Aston Villa. Look at those 2 images side by side for a second. One player is captured in the act of seeing the pitch 3 passes ahead. The other is captured in the act of taking the ball off somebody. Those are not photographs of the same job. They're photographs of 2 different sports being played inside the same position. Both signed on paper to solve the same vacancy.
Neither signed to do it the same way. The question isn't whether these are good players. They are. The question is, which one of them is actually replacing Casemiro, and whether Michael Carrick has quietly created a competition instead of a solution. Since taking over from Ruben Amorim, Carrick has kept United in a 4-2-3-1, the most conservative structural decision available to him, and by design. He inherited a squad mid-crisis and chose stability over reinvention. No back 3 experiment, no positional revolution. Just a clean, familiar double pivot behind a free-roaming number 10. Bruno Fernandes has moved further forward into a permanent number 10 role, the exact space he's always looked most dangerous in, and a decision that quietly simplifies half of Carrick's rebuild.
Kobbie Mainoo, having signed a new long-term contract that runs to 2031, is now the first name on the team sheet in central midfield. United see his renewal as a priority for the future, not a rotation option. He is, structurally, the one certainty in this entire midfield conversation. Everything else is being built around him. But the pivot beside him is, structurally, empty. Casemiro is gone. Manuel Ugarte, the player originally signed to succeed him, is sidelined long-term. His role in the squad still unresolved. Mason Mount deputised competently in the anchor role late last season, but nobody at the club is describing that as a long-term answer. Mount's version of the role worked as a stopgap, precisely because everyone understood it as a stopgap. Nobody built a system assuming he'd stay there. That's not a system with a double pivot. That's a system with 1.5. And that half a player gap is not a small structural quirk.
It's the single most important seat at the table in a 4-2-3-1. It's the position that decides whether the back four gets exposed in transition, whether Fernandes gets protected enough to actually play with freedom further forward, whether Mainoo gets to do the things he's good at instead of covering for a partner who can't, which is exactly the gap Tielemans and Santos were signed into. Here's the friction. Tielemans and Santos were not signed into two different roles. On current evidence, they were signed into competition for the same one. If Andrey Santos is the natural successor to Casemiro's anchoring role, which is how he's being read inside the building, then the case is thin so far. 13 Premier League starts is not a sample size that settles the question of whether a 22-year-old can shoulder that defensive responsibility alone, week after week, against the physical demands of an English season, rather than the more forgiving rhythm he grew up in back in Brazil. His underlying numbers hint at the profile: an excellent one-on-one containment rate, closer to a screener than a hunter. He reads passing lanes well. He's rarely dragged out of position. But screening isn't the same job Casemiro did at his positional peak. Casemiro didn't just discourage the pass. He ended possessions, physically, in contact, over and over, for 90 minutes, in a way that let everyone in front of him play with total freedom. If, instead, Tielemans takes the pivot spot, and last season he was rated the best line-breaking passer in the entire Premier League, ahead of both Fernandes and Casemiro, then United get a more creative, more progressive version of the outgoing Brazilian. That statistic alone should stop you. Not one of the best. The best. Ahead of the two players most associated with progressive passing in this squad over the last several years. He can defend adequately too. He's not a defensive liability by any means. But pairing him with Mainoo creates a midfield of two technically gifted, intelligent passers who are not built to win the physical battles a Premier League season demands. That's not speculation. It's the exact concern being raised by people inside the game right now. A Tielemans-Mainoo pivot, on its own, lacks legs. Two players who want the ball at their feet, who thrive on time and space, sharing a pivot with nobody designated to win the ball back first. Against a team that presses aggressively and forces mistakes in transition, that's the exact pairing that gets exploited. Both signings solve half of Casemiro's job description. Neither one, alone, solves all of it. And Carrick still hasn't shown his hand on which combination he trusts to start the season. That's not indecision for its own sake. It might genuinely be a coin flip between two imperfect answers, which is arguably worse than having no answer to debate at all. And here's the uncomfortable truth.
Michael Carrick built his own playing career on being exactly the kind of deep-lying, tempo-dictating passer that Tielemans is being brought in to replicate. That's not a coincidence. It's a philosophical signature. Carrick is recruiting in his own image. It's a completely understandable instinct. Managers trust what they know, and Carrick spent a decade proving that a deep-lying midfielder who never loses the ball can be the quiet engine of a dominant team. But he played that role next to genuine physical presence around him, enforcers who did the collision work so he didn't have to. The version of Manchester United's midfield being assembled right now doesn't obviously have that enforcer yet. Recruiting two versions of yourself doesn't replace what Casemiro actually provided on top of the passing range. Physical presence, ground coverage, the ability to win a duel and reset the defensive structure in the same movement. Mainoo offers composure on the ball, not that.
Tielemans offers range and line-breaking distribution, not that. Santos offers screening and containment, but not yet the proven physical dominance of a Premier League anchor at full season intensity. The uncomfortable truth is this. United have spent £85 million adding technique and passing quality to a midfield that already had plenty of it, and they still haven't conclusively replaced the one attribute Casemiro was signed for in the first place: legs, and the willingness to do the ugly job so the technical players don't have to. Put another way, if you lined up United's midfield options right now on a spectrum from can pass to can tackle, you'd have a cluster of names bunched up on one end and almost nobody standing confidently on the other. That's not a balanced squad. That's a very good half of a squad, purchased twice. They've upgraded the engine. They still haven't found the anchor.
Which is why the third midfield addition, not Tielemans, not Santos, may end up being the signing that actually determines whether this rebuild works. United have already been linked with the physical, ground-covering profiles they still lack: Carlos Baleba, Manu Kone, Sander Berge, among others. That's not a coincidence. It's an admission. Think about what that list actually says. These aren't creative names. Nobody is scouting Baleba for his through balls. Every one of those players exists on the market for one reason. They cover ground, they win the ball, and they let the players around them play with confidence. If United genuinely believed Tielemans and Mainoo or Santos alone had already solved the pivot, there would be no reason to be circling that list at all. That's the story worth watching. Not whether Tielemans or Santos are good enough for Manchester United. They clearly are. Whether Michael Carrick, having spent £85 million on technique, still has the budget and the transfer window time left to buy back what Casemiro gave him for free.